Okay, I call the Business Plan Committee meeting to order. And any declarations of conflict or pecuniary interest? Seeing none, I'm looking for a mover and a seconder for the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held in camera. Member Ganzel, Member Bonham. Any questions or discussion regarding the minutes? Seeing none, looking for a show of hands for approval, and that's carried. Okay, under new business, our one item of business today is the questionnaire, and we have the revisions there. At the last meeting, there was requests regarding including downtown core, and there were requests for value for money questions. And the core questions are 2, 3, and 6A have been adopted to reflect downtown, and questions 15 and 16 were added in on the value for money. So with that in mind, if I open it to questions regarding that, Member Gale?
You know, heard about the revisions, and as long as the chief's on side with this too, from it, and I would take it he is. But I'll wait to hear. This is like the award ceremony where you couldn't eat, eh?
He's just having a snack.
I'll throw you a bun. As long as you're on side, I'm very satisfied with this, and so.
Yeah, I've had some discussion with Dr. Divers and with Deputy Forty, and we're supportive of the questionnaire as it's currently worded.
So, Member Stewart, I think you did a good job on this. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from board members? I have one question, and that's question 15. One word in there I think might be softened somewhat, and that's down at the low end of the scale for those who think they're not getting value for the money. The word terrible, I wondered if there was a word that was a little different than that one. Well, I was thinking something more like, you know, below average or poor or something like that, you know. It's maybe a small point. I don't know what others think about just, you know, because this is going to be read out because it's a phone survey, right? So.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We were trying to capture the essence of the discussion in the most fulsome way, but we can move it to poor. I think
Okay.
that would make sense.
It's a small point, but I don't think it's
maybe because you on 15, excellent, good, average, below average, and eliminate that and just say you don't know. I mean, there's not too much difference between. I'm not going to use the word terrible. I'm going to replace it with the word poor. There's not much difference between poor and below average. So you're only asking 1, 2, 3, 4 questions, and then I don't know.
We could remove it completely.
I mean, that's probably the easiest.
Doctor?
It just seemed to be an insightful word. That's all.
Okay.
Terry?
Thank you, Member Stewart, and through you. I believe we've lost the issue of relativity in the value for money. Asking me over the phone how I'd rate it is far different than advising me that in similar jurisdictions, the cost of money or policing per capita is A, B, and C. The cost of policing in Niagara is X. How would you rate the value for money you get for the money spent on policing in the Niagara region? That would put it in the proper context. Without that comparator, I think it generates nothing, because people have nothing to, you know, to make an assessment. You have to have the ability to do a comparison. So my concern is we've lost that comparable.
Chief?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a very delicate balance to try and provide that comparable without having any context around it, because as we know from police service and different jurisdictions, for instance, indirect allocations are something that are unique to our budget here in Niagara, and the budget for different jurisdictions is not necessarily capturing the same items from police service to police service. So I think really the context is what's happening in Niagara as opposed to what's happening, comparing it to Guelph or comparing it to Hamilton or comparing it to any other jurisdiction. Those are just my comments.
Thank you. Any other comments on that before I can? Go ahead, Terry.
Thank you, Chair. And I well take the comments of the chief with regard to what's most relevant in terms of a comparable. But like it or not, the world turns on comparables, and they're not always equal. Whether you're running a private business, a public sector facility, you're compared and contrasted with your peers. And there's always circumstances wherein costs are included in or not included in various jurisdictions that may or may not have some skewing effect on the number. But at the end of the day, common practice is to compare your costs with those of others on a fairly standalone basis to give some context. And so again, I'm bringing forward my concern that we've lost the context based upon the rationale that comparable costs coming from others would not be exactly the same as ours. That's no different than anybody else running a business is putting up with in any sector. That there's always comparables out there that don't have the same factors, or they don't weight them the same, or. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't put that kind of information before the public before we ask them to draw an opinion about whether or not they feel they're getting value for money. Thank you.
Okay, to that end, just some information. One is from a survey point of view, you are very concerned about what would be called push surveying or pushing. And to put information out there, I mean, it takes, when I got on this board, it takes a real while to understand the whole nuances of financing and policing and the differences and all of that are around. To get somebody on a 10 or 12 minute survey and give them one line, you have to be very concerned about whether or not you are pushing them towards a certain answer. Okay? But having said that, I did some research on that for the board, and if you wish to discuss it, I've got some data here for you, and we can do that. So I don't know what other board members feel. Do you wish to pursue that line?
Well, if it's puts into context this issue, that would be, I think, very appropriate.
Well, maybe we could take 5 minutes, discuss it, and then see whether we wish to put a question like that in or not in. So just to go through this information for you, the first page you have in front of you is from the most recent Police Resources in Canada report put out by Stats Canada. And the most recent year that they use is the 2016. They call it 2016-17 because not everyone uses the same fiscal year end across the country. So if you look down the bottom of in the first section under current dollars, because if you're using constant 2002 dollars, that's removing inflation from it. So the current dollars across Canada, the cost of policing per capita is $405 per capita. So that's the source of that information. Okay? That's the cost per capita of policing for whatever. Now, what it includes is important, and if you look at the notes down the bottom, okay, especially note number 1 and 2 are about the current dollars and the constant dollars. Item number 3 includes total operating expenditures, including salaries, wages, benefits, and other operating expenses that are paid from the police services budget as well as paid from other government sources. Revenues, recoveries, and those costs that fall under police services capital expenditures are excluded. So this is operating expenditure. So if you're looking for comparison to comparison, okay, we know what we're dealing with that $405 per capita amount. Now, the second page that I've provided for you is just the year-end summary, because it includes all the actuals from 2016, from the 2016 year and the financial statements for it, just as a backup. Now, what I did was sit down with finance and try to come up with how do we make Niagara's expenditure, which was, the gross expenditure was 155,000 or 155 million and change in 2016. How do we take and make it to be roughly as close as we can an equivalent comparison with the $405 per capita that exists? So if you look at the blue page, what we've done is taken the gross expenditure of 155 million, and then we removed any transfers to capital, because that $405 nationally does not include capital expenditures. So the second list down there, with totaling 6,463,176, are all capital expenditures, which we felt would not be proper to have in the comparison, because the other $405 does not include capital. The next is revenue and recoveries from third-party agencies. So in other words, we have some special things here in ours that may not exist everywhere. The first one being the 911. Now, that's not dispatch, that's 911, which the region has the responsibility for and has delegated to the police over the years for matters of efficiency, etc. But that doesn't exist everywhere, because some places, the municipalities do the 911 separate from the policing costs. So we actually get a revenue in our budget to compensate for that. Secondment salaries. We have almost $1 million worth of salary that's being taken up by other places where people may be seconded to RCMP or OPP or whatever for special projects. So although that money shows up in the 155 million, we get reimbursed for it from those other places. Licensing is, we're probably one of the rare people in licensing in the province of Ontario anyway, where the police actually do the licensing. And it's done on a cost recovery basis. Well, we recover $618,000 worth of licensing revenues. There is also the OPVTA, which is, we do work on behalf of the province and greater areas for police training videos, and we recover $330,000 from that. So that was another $3,281,627 that are really revenues that we needed to pull out of our gross expenditures. Now down below, we added some things in because, as mentioned by the chief, the cost allocation model that we have in Niagara is not universal at all, and there are operating expenses, and the service pulled out $4 million and change of that money, which is really money for building maintenance, building rental costs, those kinds of things. In other jurisdictions, rental costs are billed to the police service budget, but in our jurisdiction, it's done through a cost allocation model. So we added that $4 million back in. So we come to a operating budget with all the ins and outs there of $149,447,000. Now, when you start doing that in per capita in Niagara, using a population from 2016 of 447,888, which is again from Stats Canada, we come to an average cost per citizen of $334. Even if you use the total 155 gross amount, it's $346, and the Stats Can average for Canada is $405. So those are the numbers that I was able to put together in our best efforts. Although it's not 100% equal, it's based on our best guess is to try to include the same things in the Niagara scenario as were included in the national average. So if it's something that the board feels we want to put a line in that says, for example, the national average expenditure per capita on policing is $405. In Niagara, our average expenditure is $334, and then ask the two questions. That will be up to the board to decide if they wish to do that. But if there are any questions or comment based on this information, I certainly am ready to. Okay, Terry?
Of course, my comment would be that the $405 Canada-wide is a pretty broad comparator. In terms of relevance, I would think Ontario would be the span within which we'd want to be drawing comparators. And I would like to understand what the cost would be in Halton per capita or Woodstock or whatever. I'm not the authority, the chief's the authority. What are the costs per capita in similar size services and with similar rural, urban divides and all that kind of stuff? What are they in Ontario and how do we stack up? And given that information, I think an Ontario taxpayer, albeit they're a Canadian citizen, could make a very reasoned determination as to whether or not they're satisfied, dissatisfied, upset, concerned, whatever the case may be. Thank you. It's my comment.
Do we have any other comments? So I guess I put it to the board if they wish to put something in here. I think to your point of trying to find other data, even within Ontario, there are such great differences. And putting it together, we'd have to go to other services, get their whole breakdown and break it down. For example, Guelph doesn't have a Marine unit because they don't have need for one. We do. We didn't take out the whole casino thing out of the mix. We left it in there. Okay. Other jurisdictions don't have casinos. They don't have all of that to add to their expenditures. They don't have licensing. So it does get quite complicated when you want to start breaking it down and what information would be available from individual service basis and which services would compare to us. I'm trying to think services that have as much coastline to cover for the Marine unit as we do. There's probably not nearly as many. So, you can see getting down in the weeds is very, very difficult. And there were no stats from Stats Canada on breaking out Ontario that I could find specifically, and even within Ontario, there's a lot of jurisdictions. Can you imagine the per capita costs for policing from basically Thunder Bay to the Winnipeg border? There's a lot of area to cover and not many capitas to share it. So it's really all over the map, I guess. So, the Canadian numbers would include an awful lot of variety of services, and some will be higher and some will be lower. We happen to be lower in Niagara than that. So, but it's up to the board. If you want to put something else in, that's terrific. Member McKendrick.
Just wondering, whenever you're asking survey questions, it's advisable to consider what are you going to do with the information, right? As a community satisfaction questionnaire, my understanding is we're trying to get insight into what our community wants us to do to improve our policing services. I feel like providing information such as the average is 405, Niagara's is 323, what do you think about that, is going to get I think we should get more money versus giving us insight into how do they feel they're getting services and would they be willing to pay more money to increase those services. That's what we're trying to get at. So I guess my question would be, if we put in that line and the information we got back was the community says we need to be more in line with the average, do we actually have influence over that to do anything with that data? Or are we more concerned with, do you think you're getting value right now? Would you be able to pay more without the comparator? That's my question.
If you're looking at me for an answer, we didn't, we didn't put it in for that reason, because I think it starts to push people towards a view. And, you know, I know Member Baum does make a point to say, are they qualified to do that? Do they have information? But I don't think you can put two lines down and all of a sudden somebody's now qualified to make that kind of judgment. This is about a feeling. This is about a perception, and that's what we're getting. Do they have the perception that they're getting fair value for money? It's not a math question. That's, but like I said, the board can decide what they wish to have.
And if I may, a question that we have influence over to make a difference versus just getting an opinion and, like you said, pushing towards a comparator that we don't necessarily have an influence over. So I guess my opinion would be to leave the comparator out and to go for the, what are you feeling, would you be willing?
Any other comments? So the motion on the floor is to approve the revised questionnaire for the 2018 Community Satisfaction Survey. I don't think I have a mover and seconder yet. Could I have a mover for that? Member Gansell, seconded by Member Gale. Any further comment? Okay, all those in favor of the questionnaire? Opposed? That is carried. So just for information purposes, now that we have a questionnaire settled, the service will go out and get requests for proposal from companies that will implement the survey on our behalf. Also currently, I'll have to talk to Deputy Forty on this afterwards, is that you know, we've got some dates being kicked around now to start the consultation process with all the local interest groups of all descript that we talked about last time. And once those dates are set, they'll be shared with the board. They're looking at taking place pretty much over July and August to try to get some further input as well. So is there any new business from anyone? Seeing none, the meeting is adjourned.